Really feeling how much we need our practice right now. Yeah, our inner practice and this collective practice of our Sangha. And what helps with that, right? What helps us slow down and listen inwardly, feel a little more held and spacious. Bill and Susan call this the holding environment, what we set up for our practice. And Ajahn Chah, wonderful Thai forest monk, called this the one seat, taking the one seat. And Jack Kornfield, who studied with Ajahn Chah, he puts it this way: when we take the one seat on our meditation cushion, we become our own monastery. We're creating the compassionate space that allows for the arising of all things: sorrow, loneliness, shame, desire, regret, frustration, happiness. So I hear in that quote both stillness and space, this idea of the monastery, and movement, the arising and passing of all things. Stillness and movement. These are foundational aspects of the holding environment and doorways to wisdom in our practice. And in some ways, another sort of pair or paradox. We've been focusing a bit on paradoxes in our practice. They're a little bit like two sides of one coin. Always within movement, there's stillness, and within stillness, there's movement. And so as I thought about this in this talk today, there's a quote that came to mind that meditation teacher Kitty Sorrow often shares from one of his teachers. And the quote is, "As space is to form and silence is to sound, so is awareness to all experience." As space is to form and silence is to sound, so is awareness to all experience. So let's take each for a moment. As space is to form, so forms, all forms, bodies, oceans, trees, thoughts, mountains. All forms exist within a vast space. We might think of forms as movement, as what is moving, arising and passing, subject to change. And that space within which that all arises is unchanging. Like that analogy of the sky holding the space for the clouds to move through. So as space is to form and silence is to sound, every sound, just like forms, arising from and passing back into silence. Sound as movement, something living, coming and going. So often, as part of our spiritual path, we're seeking more silence to find some balance. So as space is to form and silence is to sound, so is awareness to all experience. This is our holding environment, right? The purpose of it allows that awareness to hold all experience. Stillness of our holding environment, or we could call it our inner monastery, or the one seat, where everything can be observed and connected to and known. We don't push any of it away. Actually, the opposite, right? awareness means an intimacy, being much more intimate with what is moving through. So we're not turning away from forms or experience or movement, but we're also not getting caught in forms or identified with experience. And this is where that balance is. Relationship between the two. And so Kitty Sorrow puts it this way. He asks, when a breath begins and ends, what remains unchanged? When a sound emerges and then subsides, there's still something. It isn't a thing, but a presence, a still, silent, and listening awareness. Conditions change, but the knowing remains. And so how do we think about stillness and movement as we set up the holding environment? It's right there, right? We focus on the body, these forms that are alive. We move a little bit to create some space and unwinding inside. And so we can connect to the spaciousness around us as well. That stillness within which the body is held. We focus on the breath where there is movement and stillness. That pause at the top of each breath, the bottom of each exhalation. And the focus on the breath itself is a stilling of the mind. Often it's our anchor. So that even if the breath isn't still, the narrowing of the attention and focus on it brings a little bit more steadiness. And same with sounds, right? That can be our anchor as well. We notice the sounds coming and going and the silence around the sounds. And we become little by little more gathered and centered in this monastery of ours. And as we do this, though, we can get caught in wanting one or the other, or leaning in to either extreme, which can lead to imbalance. Because as we set up the holding environment, or as we practice, if we're so intent on, I must be still, I have to focus, I have to do this right, as David talked about on Monday, things can become tight and contracted and brittle. And life can't actually move through. Sometimes we come to practice with that energy, right? We want everything to stop. We want there to be silence. And silence can be wonderful, but if there's attachment to that, or to having no thoughts, nothing happening, make it all stop, that's death, actually. Absolute stillness is death. And we don't want that. And at the same time, we also don't want to be too addicted and attached to movement, to the forms, to thoughts, to sounds, feelings. We already live in such an agitated world. There's such addiction to agitation. We get caught in forms. We think that what's appearing and passing is what matters most. That's what we need to control, or that's what has to be a certain way for us to be good meditators. And we lose the truth of the stillness around all of that. And there can be discomfort with stillness and silence, a fear of it. And so sometimes as we're practicing or setting up the practice, we can be kind of always rearranging and perfecting that restlessness, scatteredness. And without any connection to stillness, we are much more likely to become lost and reactive. And we're going to start identifying with the movement that's happening. Liking it, not liking it, it's mine. So we really need both. And I was thinking also about how we have the inner holding environment that we set up each practice. And then here together, we have this collective holding environment, this collective monastery that has a balance of stillness and movement in it as well. We come together, we sit, and we get a little more quiet and still and spacious together. And there's also form and sound and life in every meeting. There's words right now coming and going. There's a beginning, middle, and end to each meeting. We come together in this particular group of people each time, and we move apart. And so just sitting with that parallel of the inner holding environment and our collective one as well. So as space is to form and silence is to sound, so is awareness to all experience. And I want to end with another quote by Kitty Sorrow. And just listen for the balance and blend of stillness and movement, and how it sounds to me like he's really talking about the holding environment. He says, when we're so busy getting somewhere, we don't realize the unshakable stability of where we always are. We can use the out-breath to practice letting be and get a feeling for resting in awareness, the presence that always is. Conditions still arise and cease. Each sound still appears, but we notice it moving back into unmoving silence. Ajahn Chah encouraged us to patiently maintain this contemplation. He urged us to find that place where we're not desperately holding on. It is a place of true trustworthiness, a safe harbor, a place of peace. The Buddha called it a refuge that is always here and now, inviting, to be experienced individually by each wise person. When we follow these teachings, we are not rejecting the conditions of life, but learning to find balance within them. So thank you for your attention.